After he arrived in Nashville, Chris Stapleton was a successful songwriter. But those stars always believed Stapleton's time in the spotlight would come. And boy, has it.
There are moments in music that stop time, when one voice cuts straight to the heart. That night, Chris Stapleton stepped on stage and sang a song Garth Brooks thought he knew better than anyone. But as the final note faded, the country legend sat in silence, tears in his eyes. The world saw the emotion, but some whispers say it wasn't just the song that broke him. Could there have been something more behind those tears? Chris Stapleton's rise to fame. Chris Stapleton has always had a sound that cuts straight through the noise. It's the kind of voice that makes people stop what they're doing and just listen. And now that same gritty, soulful, and heartbreakingly honest voice recently moved Garth Brooks himself to tears after hearing Stapleton's stunning cover of Shameless. Christopher Alvin Stapleton was born on April 15, 1978 in Lexington, Kentucky, and had the kind of upbringing that shaped his humility and grit, grounding him in a working-class reality that would later echo through every lyric he wrote. The soundtrack of his early years was the raw sound of Appalachian roots, gospel harmonies, and the kind of storytelling that comes from people who've lived hard lives and loved deeply. In school, Chris was absolutely brilliant. In fact, he graduated as valedictorian of Johnson Central High School, proving that his mind was just as sharp as his voice was soulful. After that, he attended Vanderbilt University in Nashville to study engineering, but something in him couldn't sit still behind equations and lecture notes. The pull of music was stronger. Within a year, he dropped out, trading classrooms for open mics and smoky writers' rounds around town. Nashville in the mid-90s was buzzing with talent, and Stapleton arrived right in the middle of it. In 1996, he signed a publishing deal with C. Gale Music, quietly beginning one of the most remarkable songwriting careers in country history. While the spotlight often shines on the singers, it's the writers in Nashville who build the backbone of the industry, and Chris was about to become one of its most valuable. Over the years, he wrote and co-wrote more than 1,000 songs, pouring stories and emotion into lyrics that other artists would turn into hits. George Strait sang his words. Kenny Chesney, Josh Turner, and Luke Bryan recorded his songs. Even outside the country, his influence stretched wide. Adele famously covered "If It Hadn't Been for Love," a song Stapleton wrote, and years later, Ed Sheeran would team up with him on the powerhouse rock track Blow. But Chris wasn't content staying behind the curtain. In the early 2000s, he stepped into the spotlight with the Steel Drivers, a bluegrass band that gave him space to showcase that thunderous voice of his. Their sound was a mix of tradition and rebellion, tight harmonies layered over gritty, heartfelt lyrics, and it didn't take long for fans to notice the guy with the big beard and the even bigger voice. The Steel Drivers earned Grammy nominations and built a loyal following, but Stapleton eventually left to explore something louder and freer. That became the Johnson Brothers, a southern rock band that leaned into raw guitar riffs and the unfiltered power of his vocals. Each phase of his journey sharpened a different edge of his artistry. The Steel Drivers gave him roots, the Johnson Brothers gave him grit, and by the time he went solo, Chris Stapleton had already lived several musical lives, and all of them prepared him for the sound that would eventually define him. When his debut solo album, Traveler, came out in 2015, the world finally caught up to what Nashville insiders already knew. Chris Stapleton wasn't just a songwriter, he was a generational voice. The album swept the CMA Awards that year, winning Album of the Year, Male Vocalist of the Year, and New Artist of the Year. His duet performance of Tennessee Whiskey with Justin Timberlake became one of those viral music moments that people still talk about, a soulful explosion that turned a slow classic into something transcendent. Overnight, Stapleton went from respected songwriter to household name. Since then, he's earned a staggering collection of honors: 11 Grammy Awards, over 15 CMA Awards, and 11 ACM Awards. But what stands out most isn't the trophies, it's how he won them. He never chased radio hits or industry trends, but his rich and unpolished voice carries the weight of old blues and Southern soul, while his songwriting blends country storytelling with the intensity of rock and the melancholy of gospel. In 2023, Rolling Stone named him one of the 200 greatest singers of all time, ranking him at number 170, an acknowledgement that put him in the company of legends, though anyone who's heard him live would argue that number should be higher. His performances are simple, often just him, a guitar, and his wife Morgane harmonizing beside him. Yet somehow, those stripped-down moments feel bigger than any stadium production. And when he sang Shameless, he wasn't just covering a song. He was reclaiming it, reshaping it through the lens of his own journey, with every struggle, every heartbreak, and every triumph folded into the sound. And for Garth Brooks, who once turned that very song into a hit, hearing it sung with that kind of soul must have felt like coming full circle. The struggles behind the spotlight. For all the applause, the awards, and the packed arenas, Chris Stapleton has never looked entirely comfortable in the glare of fame. He's the kind of artist who'd rather let his music do the talking. A man who can command a crowd of thousands, yet still seems most at home in a quiet corner with his guitar, lost in a song. This calm presence might make it look easy, but behind that stillness lies a story of pressure, doubt, and the heavy cost of being extraordinary in a world that never stops watching. Chris's anchor through all of it has been Morgane. They tied the knot in 2007, long before the fame, and the spotlight tried to pull them apart. Morgane Hayes was a songwriter herself, working in Nashville when they met, and their connection was instant. She wasn't just his partner in life, she became his creative mirror, the one who could hear a rough idea and know what it could become. On stage, she stands beside him, harmonizing so closely it's hard to tell where his voice ends and hers begins. The two of them have built a family together, with 5 children who remain almost entirely out of public view. While the world wants to peek behind the curtain, Chris and Morgane have guarded their home life with a rare kind of discipline. He said before that he doesn't owe anyone that part of himself, and he stuck to it. Still, the demands of his career have pushed him to the edge more than once. Touring, recording, and constant expectation can drain even the strongest performers. Stapleton has admitted that the road takes its toll, and that there are nights he walks off stage completely spent. His shows are known for their raw emotion, and that intensity doesn't just come from technique, it comes from somewhere deep inside. But pouring yourself out like that night after night comes with a cost. He's spoken candidly about burnout, about the strain of balancing fatherhood with fame. But Chris has spent most of his career avoiding scandals and controversy. In fact, he rarely gives interviews, he doesn't live on social media, and he doesn't chase the kind of fame that feeds on constant visibility. This quietness, though, has sometimes made people project their own ideas onto him, especially when he does choose to speak up. In 2020, during one of the most heated cultural moments in recent memory, Chris made headlines for a statement. He expressed his support for racial equality and diversity in country music, saying that change was overdue and that the genre had to open its doors wider. The comments were simple, measured, and true to his character, but they came at a time when even a hint of political awareness could set off a storm. Some conservative fans called him a sellout. Others swore off his music entirely. The backlash was loud, but Stapleton didn't backpedal or argue. He just kept doing what he's always done: show up, play, and let the songs speak for themselves. That's always been the paradox of Chris Stapleton. The man who seems too calm to be controversial ends up being the one people debate the most. He's been criticized for being too quiet, too slow, and too boring, especially in an industry that prizes flash and showmanship. Yet those same stripped-down performances, the ones where he just stands there, eyes closed, pouring his voice into the mic, have brought audiences to tears. He made headlines once again during the CMA Awards in 2024. What should have been another celebration turned into a social media battleground. When Stapleton took home another major award, beating out breakout artist Shabuzi, Twitter lit up with accusations of favoritism and bias. Some called the show rigged, claiming the industry was protecting its longtime stars instead of embracing the new wave. The criticism was swift and harsh, but this time, something interesting happened. Instead of piling on, a wave of fans, fellow musicians, and even critics came to his defense. They reminded everyone that Stapleton didn't vote for himself, and that his wins weren't about politics or trends. They were about consistency, mastery, and the kind of artistry that transcends any single moment. Inside Nashville, insiders described him as the musician's musician, the guy everyone respects, even if they don't play his kind of music. That respect didn't come from charm or media savvy. It came from years of showing up, writing songs that moved people, and never cutting corners. Even through public backlash, Chris Stapleton has never shifted his focus. He's the first to admit that fame makes him uneasy, that sometimes he feels like an outsider in the very world he dominates. But maybe that's what keeps him grounded. Every award he wins, every sold-out show, and every viral performance feels less like a victory lap and more like a quiet reminder of where he came from. And that's why, when he stepped up to sing Shameless, something electric happened. The room fell silent, not because it was a famous song, but because everyone could feel what was coming. Garth Brooks, the man who once made that very song his own anthem, sat there listening, not as a superstar, but as a fan. And as Chris sang, Garth's eyes were wet, and everyone in the room felt it. The moment Stapleton made Garth cry. It was one of those nights that felt bigger than the music itself. In 2020, Washington, D.C.'s Dar Constitution Hall filled with an audience that understood exactly what they were there to celebrate: the legacy of Garth Brooks. The Library of Congress was honoring him with the prestigious Gershwin Prize for Popular Song, a recognition reserved for songwriters whose work has shaped American music. The stage was a lineup of country royalty and musical legends: Keith Urban, Lee Brice, Ricky Skaggs, Keb Mo, Trisha Yearwood, and Chris Stapleton. Each came to honor Garth in their own way, performing songs that had defined his career. But no one expected the night's most unforgettable moment to come from the quietest man in the room. When Chris Stapleton stepped onto that stage, there wasn't any grand entrance, just a man with a guitar, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face, and that unmistakable stillness he carries wherever he goes. Garth Brooks watched from the audience, sitting beside his wife, Trisha Yearwood, the emotion already visible in his eyes. He knew Stapleton was about to sing Shameless, a song that carried a history of its own, a song that had once been his own triumph. Shameless didn't begin in Nashville. It was written by Billy Joel in 1989, a slow-burning ballad drenched in vulnerability and pride. Garth had heard it and reimagined it through a country lens 2 years later, turning it into one of his signature hits on Rope in the Wind. It was a song that showed a different side of him, the bold, unapologetically romantic and fearless side. For Garth, that song wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. So to hear another artist step into it decades later in his honor was already personal. But what Chris did that night wasn't a copy or a tribute, it was something else entirely. From the very first note, the room shifted. His version was stripped down, raw to the bone. No full band, no soaring background vocals, just the weight of his voice and the ache in every word. Where Billy Joel's version had been melodic and Garth's had carried a thunderous country energy, Stapleton's was intimate, almost confessional. Every phrase seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, and his tone carried that familiar gravelly warmth that turns ordinary lyrics into something deeper. He bent the melody just enough to make it his own, lingering on the edges of each line, like he was exploring the spaces between the words. As he sang, "I'm shameless when it comes to loving you," his voice cracked slightly, and that small imperfection made it perfect. Garth leaned forward, his expression changing from pride to something else entirely. It was the look of a man hearing his own story told back to him in a way he hadn't felt before. The audience might have seen a tribute performance, but for Garth, it was deeply personal. Trisha reached for his hand as the emotion welled up. In that instant, sitting there as Chris Stapleton turned his song into a quiet storm of soul and truth, it broke through every layer of composure he had. When the final note faded, there was a silence that felt heavy, like no one wanted to break the spell. Then came the applause, a standing ovation that Garth himself joined, rising to his feet, still blinking through tears. It wasn't the first time Stapleton had been called a once-in-a-generation voice, but that night it felt undeniable. Even among a stage full of Nashville's elite, he stood apart. Not because he sang louder or moved more, but because he made everyone feel something real. Earlier in the night, Stapleton had already performed Rodeo, another Garth classic, and that performance had been the complete opposite. It was gritty, rough-edged, and electrifying. It reminded everyone that beneath his soulful exterior, Stapleton carried the fire of Southern rock and the rhythm of the blues. But Shameless was where he showed the heart behind it all. Together, those two songs captured the full spectrum of who he is as an artist. Watching from the audience, Garth must have seen a reflection of his own journey too. Both men came from humble beginnings. Both built their careers on authenticity, and both had faced moments where fame tested who they were. To see this song reborn through another man's truth wasn't just flattering, it was overwhelming. It's rare in music for one artist to move another like that, especially across generations. But that's what happened in that hall. Not long after the concert ended, the first fan-recorded clips began surfacing online. By morning, they had gone viral. On Twitter, people wrote about how they'd replayed the video over and over, each time catching new shades of emotion in Stapleton's voice. The YouTube upload racked up millions of views within days, and the comment section turned into a flood of gratitude. Fans wrote about how the performance made them cry, about how they felt something they hadn't felt in years. Some said it reminded them of their father, who used to play Garth's records every Sunday morning, and how Stapleton's version made them understand the song for the first time. Critics and industry insiders joined in. Some media outlets called it a masterclass in emotional storytelling, while others described it as one of the most powerful live tributes ever broadcast. Even outside country circles, the performance drew attention for its honesty. Other artists praised Stapleton for the way he handled the moment. Producers talked about the simplicity of the arrangement and how it left no room to hide behind production tricks or background noise. It was just his voice, a guitar, and pure emotion. For Garth, the emotion of that night was more than nostalgia. He'd built a career on big stages, on spectacle and energy, on the thrill of connecting with massive crowds. But what Stapleton did reminded him and everyone watching of what music is really about when you strip it all down. Long after the concert ended, people kept talking about that moment, especially because of how it made people feel. Social media is filled with stories of people saying the performance helped them through grief, reminded them of lost love, or simply made them stop and listen. Inside Nashville, that performance quickly became legend. Industry veterans called it proof that sincerity will always outshine spectacle. Younger musicians watched and learned that it's possible to honor tradition while still being entirely yourself. For Garth, it was a reminder that legacy isn't about ownership, it's about connection. And that night, as he sat there overcome with emotion, it revealed a deeper part of Garth Brooks few ever get to see. People often talk about his passion, his heart, and the way he connects to every song he sings. But what many don't realize is that this emotion comes from somewhere real. Behind the fame and the wide grin is a man who's carried his share of heartbreak, pressure, and loss, and that's what's always made his music feel so alive. The man behind the music. Garth Brooks has always been more than just a country singer. He's a showman who redefined what country music could sound and feel like. When his debut album dropped in 1989, it introduced a voice that was powerful yet deeply human, someone who could move from tenderness to thunder without missing a beat. But it was his second album, No Fences, that turned him into a phenomenon, selling over 17 million copies and reshaping the entire genre. Garth wasn't afraid to blur lines. He brought the energy of rock concerts into country arenas, mixing storytelling with spectacle in a way no one had before. His music spoke to small-town dreamers and city crowds alike, and his live shows became events people talked about for years. His trophy shelf tells part of the story. 2 Grammys, 17 American Music Awards, countless honors from the Country Music Hall of Fame, and in 2020, the Gershwin Prize for Popular Song, where he became the youngest recipient ever. But awards have never been what people remember most about Garth. What stays with audiences is his heart. He's cried on stage, in interviews, and even in the middle of his own songs, unashamed to show what the music means to him. This emotional openness, the same one that surfaced the night Chris Stapleton sang Shameless, has always been at the center of who he is. For someone who's always seemed larger than life, Garth Brooks has carried the quiet weight of being human in a way most people never see. Fame may have made him untouchable, but it also made him vulnerable. And through the years, that vulnerability has shown up in his health, his family, and his work. His struggles with weight have been a story he never tried to hide. During the height of his touring years, long days on the road and a constant demand to perform left little room for discipline. He has admitted that food became both comfort and escape. At one point, his weight climbed beyond 300 pounds. The same energy that made him unstoppable on stage made it difficult to slow down off it, and the exhaustion of trying to keep up with his own legend pushed him into habits that weren't always healthy. When he later decided to lose the weight, with the help and encouragement of his wife Trisha Yearwood, it wasn't a vanity project. It was survival. Losing more than 50 pounds didn't just change how he looked, it changed how he felt about his own strength. But the physical challenges didn't stop there. In recent years, whispers about high blood pressure have followed him, something worsened by the stress of constant public scrutiny and the endless pace of his career. Insider reports have described moments where the pressure felt unbearable, with sleepless nights, bursts of anxiety, and the kind of fatigue that fame never prepares you for. There are also rumors of him falling back into small habits that signaled emotional strain. Late-night snacking, hiding junk food from Trisha, skipping meals before big appearances, and trying to smile through exhaustion. His private life has been just as complex. Garth's first marriage to Sandy Mall was once the anchor that steadied his early rise, but as his fame grew, so did the distance between them. The two met in college long before the fame, and built a life that seemed solid from the outside. But by 2001, after 15 years together, it fell apart. The divorce was a breaking point, and Garth later admitted that the separation shook him deeply. In fact, many believe it's what led him to step away from music entirely. This period of self-imposed retirement wasn't a retreat from success. It was an act of love. Garth wanted to be there for his 3 daughters, to make up for the years lost to airports, interviews, and endless tours. It's something few artists at his level have ever done, to trade the roar of an audience for the quiet rhythm of home life. Those years, though rarely discussed in interviews, shaped the man he became later. He found a new kind of purpose as a father, trying to rebuild normalcy after years of chaos. Still, even stepping away didn't free him from the weight of public expectation. When he returned in 2005, fans were divided. Some wondered if he could still capture the same spark that once filled stadiums, while others waited to see if he'd reinvent himself again. But the comeback wasn't smooth. Garth had to face a different kind of audience that had moved on and had new heroes. His performances were still heartfelt, but the energy around him had shifted. Over time, though, he managed to climb back, proving once again that his connection to the crowd was strong. But the lowest point in his professional image came years earlier with the Chris Gaines experiment in 1999. It was supposed to be bold and experimental, a fictional rock alter ego complete with a backstory, an album, and even a film project in the works. Instead, it turned into one of the most talked-about missteps in pop culture. Fans didn't know what to make of it. Critics mocked it. For months, Garth became the punchline of his own ambition. The sting of that failure lingered for years. Yet he never disowned it. He carried it like another scar, quietly, as part of the price of being fearless. In late 2024, the kind of storm no artist can prepare for happened when headlines broke that a woman identified as Jane Roe had filed a lawsuit against Garth Brooks, accusing him of serious inappropriate behavior during a trip to Los Angeles 5 years earlier. The allegations were shocking, claims of boundary violations and coercion. Brooks denied the accusations outright, calling them malicious and false. In public statements, he said the ordeal felt like having a weapon waved in his face. His legal team painted the lawsuit as an attempt to extort millions from him, while the woman's lawyers described her as a survivor, finally speaking out. The story divided public opinion almost instantly. When Brooks chose to file a countersuit in Mississippi under a pseudonym but later naming the accuser in official court papers, it sparked backlash. Some saw it as an effort to defend himself forcefully. Others viewed it as intimidation. The press dissected every filing, every quote, and every motion, while fans who had grown up with his music struggled to reconcile the man they admired with the story in front of them. Through it all, Brooks stayed mostly quiet, except for a few tense interviews where his emotions seemed to spill through. During one appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, his voice wavered when asked how he was handling the situation. He spoke vaguely about how challenging the experience was, and it was clear the toll was heavy. Insider reports have described him as exhausted, stressed by court deadlines, haunted by speculation, and trying desperately to protect his family from the noise. This combination of legal battles, health pressure, and public scrutiny has painted the picture of a man caught between fighting for his name and trying not to lose himself in the process. Garth Brooks has always worn his emotions openly, on stage, in interviews, and now even in his lowest moments. Every tear, every stumble, and every comeback has carried that same rawness that first made people love him. Behind the hit songs and historic records is a man who has fallen hard, risen slowly, and kept singing through it all. What do you think about Chris Stapleton's performance of Shameless? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.